how do you show the geography to the audience? Because you shot in desert, in prison, in jungle, many places. Do you have a colleague or somebody in the crew who's helping in it? Where to put the camera and show the audience where we are and where are our characters and where do they move?
Again, this is an individual choice. You can set up an establishing shot from far away and just say, hey, this is the location, this is the house, or else you could save that for later and go into the action, show the action interior as tight. You can start on a close-up, a tight shot if you think that's the most important thing to do. Let's say I wanted to start a scene on an eyeball and I wanted to work on the face and have this person, I don't know where he is, I don't know where he's moving to, but I'm following him. Somewhere in that movement or in the development of the scene, it may become apparent where he is or she is. And then it becomes, it's inductive, it reveals itself. Sometimes the more conventional approach is deductive, which is to say you go outside house, medium shot house, interior close-up, and so forth. I would prefer the other way to make it inductive, to feel the scene as you go.
Okay, thank you. Who's next?
Oh boy, we got a break?
Do you want to have a break?
Yeah.
Okay. We can make it.
What time is it?
Yeah, we have half an hour yet. Another half an hour.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
You
can
can
ask.
do it.
Okay, you can ask your question.
My name is Frank, and in your first half of your career, you was working with only one cinematographer, a cameraman called Robert Richardson. And in your second half of your career, you are working with several cinematographers, cameramans. With Robert Richardson, you were very successful pair together. Robert Richardson's cameraman style was very dynamic, very rhythmful. My question is that was your decision to finish the relationship with Robert Richardson? And if yes, why?
Very good cameraman, but cameramen are like wives. Some people have to have different wives. They have to move on. And for him too, I think we'd been together for whatever, up through U-turn and up to that point. And then things, he was younger than me. He needed to feel like perhaps I was too dominant, the older brother in his life. So, I think he moved on. He did very good work for other people. Not the same exactly for style, but he's developed. I've developed my own way, and I enjoyed working with different cameramen because I learned from each one too. Some of them are, some I've had less good experience, but even with Bob I had problems too. I mean, there's always problems there's no easy way to make a movie. They're always breaking some eggs somewhere. But the last, I worked with, Rodrigo Prieto 3 times. 4 times with documentaries, so I much enjoyed that. And before that, Papadopoulos, Phaeton Papadopoulos was very good on W. And Saul Totino on Any Given Sunday, that was a very tough movie to make. And he did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Next question. Please, the microphone, no, in the other direction. Thanks.
Hi, my question is about movie dialogue. Do you have any way of testing whether the dialogue you write on page, how does it translate onto the screen, or is that left to the rehearsal process?
I think you can read it to yourself, but I think the rehearsal process solves a lot of it, and certainly if that doesn't, you will get a sense from a preview if it's working.
What if it doesn't? What if it doesn't?
then go back and loop it or change the angle. But you know, by that time you should be you've practiced it enough, and you've had the whole experience, and you've been on the set too, by the way. You can always do rewrites on the set, although that's a pain in the ass, you know. And it's a lot of pressure for you too. But you know, I've always done it. That's it. You know, I've always pressure works sometimes. I remember one scene with Salma and Blake. It was a scene, the dinner table scene. Yeah, we were struggling with that. There were so many different rewrites on it, and I remember we had the whole crew waiting, and we were still working on the trailer, the three of us, working on that scene. So that's pressure.
Thank you. Who's next?
Year of the Dragon. You wrote the screenplay. Michael Cimino rewrote it. How was that? How was your collaboration?
I think Michael more directed it. I think I did most of the writing because he didn't do much rewriting. But he changed it in some ways. I don't remember exactly, but no, I know I know who changed it. It was Dino, fucking Dino. That guy, that's the fifth time I had that problem with him. I've had so many problems with that guy. Yeah. You know what? The movie was a great idea because it was based on a book, and the way they got the way they got the bad guy was that they couldn't get him on anything. He was bringing heroin into New York, he was a bigamist, and our Mickey Rourke character finds that out. He's a bigamist because a lot of the Chinese don't make a big thing about marriage, and he had a Chinese wife, you see, buried back there. And when he came to America and made his fortune, he married again. So the only way at the end, after all this big chase, was that the guy, Mickey Rourke, could only catch him was as a bigamist, and that was the way by which he brought around I believe it was a shootout. So De Laurentiis, Dino says, you can't have a man married to two women. You know, he's like in his Italian 1950s mentality. A man married to two women, that's terrible. You can't, American audiences won't like that. So out it goes. Cimino should have fought for it, but didn't.
Conan the Barbarian. You worked with John Milius. How the screenplay turned out? Do you like?
Well, that was another Dino deal. He's not my favorite, Dino. Milius did his own thing. That one he did rewrite me completely. No, I mean, some of my stuff is there, and I loved that film. I killed myself for it, and I wanted it to go to Ridley Scott. Ridley almost did it, but he did Alien instead, I think it was. So, listen, it became a John Milius movie, and it's fun. It's a cartoon, and we discovered Schwarzenegger. In fact, I worked with Schwarzenegger before Milius because we thought he was great. And I remember sitting around with Arnold in my apartment, actually, and I just didn't know how to write him, and I gave him the comic book, and I remember him reading the comic book to me so I could get the rhythm by Crumb and his German accent. I thought he was charming, but it's very hard to write from Arnold. You have to have a certain rhythm.
How does it feel to be remade? Conan the Barbarian was remade.
I haven't seen it. Dino De Laurentiis was not smart. If Conan the Barbarian had been done right, it would have been a 12-picture series because there was enough material there. I had that. I could have laid it out. It would have been a James Bond series. It really would have been a serious movie, and it would have lasted. Instead, Dino, and he did this a lot, by the way, he burned it out. The second or third episode was gone. It was so bad. By the time he cut all the costs. You know, even with Milius, he cut the rocks down. The rocks are paper rocks. He shoots in these weird places like in Italy he has deals, or in North Carolina, and he makes the thing look so cheap that by the second or third Conan it was gone. If he'd been smart, he would have made each movie great, and they could have had a 12-picture series, and he would have made more money than he ever dreamed of, which is what he dreamed of all the time.
Thank you. Who's next? There, okay. Please give her a microphone.
During filmmaking, you have to think of the lighting, music, position of camera, and so on. And how do you manage this all? So, how independent is your crew or staff?
How do you manage all those decisions about where to put what on the scene?
Well, you get the best people to help you. The lighting man, The production designer, if they're strong people, they take charge, but you've discussed the idea, the main idea. You don't want to get into too many details, otherwise you'll go crazy. You'll never make it.
Yeah,
So you need good department heads. And that's very hard, by the way. Good department heads don't often get along. I hate it when a film turns into a cat brawl between somebody complaining here about somebody there. And often what happens in a movie, I've found this out to be the case on several occasions, is if you have one bad department, it screws up so much. So you have to be ruthless. Get rid of your department head who's fucking it up, for everybody else. Next time out, you know better. But it does happen. And its ideal movie is not to have stars in every department, is to have good people in every department who are working together. It's a football team. The best football teams win because they stick together. There's no I'm the man kind of routine. And I hate that I'm the man routine, which I've seen too much.
And were you always allowed to choose your staff or crew?
Are you allowed to choose your crew?
Oh, yeah. No, I've never been forced to take anybody. That would never work. I've always maintained a fair degree of independence. Yeah. No, I'd walk away if I didn't have what I wanted in terms of the crew.
Yeah, thank you. And did you have any problems or misunderstandings with the staff members ever?
Many times.
Yeah. And what did you do then?
You either fire them or
Yeah.
you have to figure out, you got to solve that. No, it's hard to get 100 people. Well, how many department heads are there? 12, 15? Maybe there's actually more on the production side. But let's say you have 20. But let's say the drivers, you depend on your producers. They pick a lot of those people. They have to work on a schedule, on a system, and there's such a thing as overtime. There's all kinds of. Right now, modern movie making has reached a place where you have thousands and thousands of pages of accounting every week. It's complicated, but if you're having problems, oh man, it really makes your life miserable. And I've had a few of those. I can't tell you who.
There is another question there. Please send the red microphone to him.
I'd like to ask about Savages is that although the subject matter is rather dark and the story is quite horrible, the things that happen, how you came to the decision to set the overall tone of the film rather bright and the visuals beautiful as it is.
Deliberately so. I find, this is my personal taste, that many modern movies have become darker and grittier and uglier. A lot of them are uglier on purpose, especially when dealing with a dark subject. I thought this was an homage to Southern California as well as an homage to the deserts of Southern California. So those two major acts in the movie, the shootouts, the ravine, Act 1 and Act 3, I thought had to be summer light. And somebody called it, one of the critics called it a desert noir, a daytime noir, that was it, a daytime noir. The scenes with the cartel are set in dungeons, and that's fine, that the blackness comes in, but it's limited. I like more light than dark. I've seen movies, you know who I'm talking about, there's several that are continually murky and dark, and the critics love that, but I don't think audiences can really tolerate it. The darkest movie I ever did was World Trade Center, and I remember very vividly because it was in the original script, we had 12 holes, scenes in the holes. I cut that down to 6. So we went into the darkness, and then we went to the light to go back to the family's dark light, constantly aware of the motion of the eye, because a dark movie, you pay a price. You pay a price. In the light, the light is what, I prefer light to the dark, but that's not to say I'm scared of the dark. In fact, on World Trade Center, what depressed me the most after working so hard on that movie was that when we showed it in the theaters, it would get dark. The projection bulbs were not very bright, so they would get even darker, and you could barely see the faces. And then, of course, when it goes to video, and you see the home screen, it got even darker. So as a result, sometimes you don't see the movie that I made, which has a lot of light in it, and the darkness is not as dark.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, there is.
I've exhausted your questions.
Okay, I'm sorry. This
You
will
again.
Be easy. This will be easy. Don't worry, we're going to ask them questions afterwards.
That's the hardest one. Don't come back.
Can I ask a question?
Can you share with us the 3 or 4 or 5 movies that really impacted you in your work? I'm not asking about your favorite movies, but the movies that you saw when you were a teenager or later that really changed the way you're thinking about movies and your work.
It's not
Sorry.
easy as you, as you
Okay.
promised.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with subtitle
When I was
sounds.
young, I would say, growing up in New York, I think On the Waterfront was the first movie I saw set in New York that was so realistic, in black and white, that really hit me. Very powerful. And to do a film in black and white that way was the noise, the sounds, the acting had an impact. And then, of course, the epics, which would have been, at that time when I saw them, would have been Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, both David Lean movies. They were so clean and big, and they could make big, larger-than-life action. Those two come to mind. But there was, obviously I've seen thousands of movies. Anyway, that's the best I can do right now.
And you said you both...
There's a question.
Oh, sorry.
I just have a quick question about the learning process that you had. Did television play any kind of a role in your becoming an Academy Award-winning director? Meaning that, have you ever done anything for television?
You do something actually for television. You do this untold history of the United States for Showtime.
I'm doing a documentary, 10 hours for history, untold history of the United States for Showtime, coming out in November. But that's 10 one-hour shows about this history. It's the only way to tell it. You can't do it in a theater. Nobody will sit for 10 hours. I would, but it seemed like that's the most practical way to do it. I produced some stuff for television, but I never directed it for television.
Quite simply, the reason why I wanted to ask this question is because in Hungary, a lot of young filmmakers just snub television, and I think television would be a fantastic way to practice their craft. What's your view on that?
Well, for sure. You're working with actors, you're working with sets, you're working with illusion. Yes, what's harm is it? I suppose you should work for an iPhone. You could do, it's a little screen eventually. It's no, if you want to work in this profession, that's the only way you do it.
Who's next? Then I wanted to ask something that you mentioned, that you bought the book Savages yourself. So are you a reader, and do you have somebody, contemporary writer whom you prefer?
No. I'm not looking for books. My subject matter has come from real life. It's come from books. It's come from magazines. It's come from myself. There's no one way. Some producers buy a lot of books, but books are not movies. There's two different mediums and two different approaches. You have to be very careful. Most good books don't make it into movies as well, and sometimes the bad books make better movies, as Hitchcock said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a couple of things, just advice for the group here, in order for them to become better at their craft. What do you think is the most important practice, or what is the most important thing that they could do or be careful of in the process?
what's your advice?
You know, everybody's different. If they're a cinematographer, obviously, if you can get a...
No, writing.
Oh, writing. Well,
Yeah.
I would simply, if the cheapest way to do something is a theater, take a little room, take some friends, write a piece, have them interact, professionalize it as much as you can, and then I see there's some theaters here in Budapest.
Lots of theaters.
Well, theater is always a very good way to learn the craft of the dynamic relationship. It has limitations, of course, but you can always put a screen up behind it and film something else and make it a multimedia. If you can get a movie, doing a short film is where I learned. We did 3 or 4 short films at NYU, and I learned a lot.
Okay, so short films, theater, keep on writing, I think.
Oh, that's right. Writing, yeah, as I said, in my early years, I did write religiously every day, tried to keep it going, 2 scripts a year, treatments, trying to visualize and bring to life on paper. It means you have to live on paper. It's a sacrifice of sorts. You do drop out of life to some degree.
I must tell you, and Oliver does practice this. I remember when we were a long time ago working on Alexander, I remember his handwritten yellow papers by the ton that I would take home and try and decipher. It was quite interesting, but he did write all the stuff out by hand. Even though computers are around and everything else, I think there's some kind of feel that you get, obviously, from feeling it on the page. You know?
I do. I love that first draft to be in your own hand.